But starting at number 10, we have the nation of Morocco. Morocco has a total active personnel of 310,000 with a defense budget of $10 billion. Morocco has one of the largest armed forces in the region, again with 310 active personnel. However, it has one of the lowest defense budgets at just $10 billion. And by the way, the defense budgets will be listed in US dollars. But despite that, it has a military power index score of 0.8408. Now, the country's forces has gained useful experience as a result of the political instability in its neighborhood. In particular, the disputed territory of the Western Sahara to the south, as well as further but limited experience in other areas, including being a part of the Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen. Now, greater investment in its military forces is expected to continue in the years to come, and they're helped a lot by their support that they get from Saudi Arabia. Moving on to number 9, we have the nation of Syria. They have a total active personnel of 142,000, and their defense budget is $1.8 billion. So of course their defense budget is a lot lower. Now, years of fighting has left Syria's military machine very damaged but also battle hardened. Their serving members total 142,000, but they're really short of personnel, and it's leading to increased efforts at conscription, which many actually do their best to completely avoid being drafted into the army. Allied militia alongside conventional forces have played an important role in keeping the regime of Bashar al-Assad from being taken over, and their military power index rating is 0.8241. Moving on now to the nation of Iraq at number 8. Iraq has a total active personnel of 165,000, and their defense budget is $1.73 billion. Now, Iraq has a pretty low defense budget, although this is still a long way behind Saudi Arabia's spending level. Now, the country's armed forces have made significant gains in recent years in battles against enemy militants, as well as recapturing the city of Mosul back in October of 2017, and driving them out of other areas of the country since then. Now, they have been helped in the task by assistance from the United States as well as other Western powers, as well as they've gotten military advice from Iran's Al-Quds Brigade. Their military power index rating is 0.7911. The nation of United Arab Emirates comes in at number 7. They have a total active personnel of 64,000, and their defense budget is a lot larger than these other nations previously that I just mentioned at $22.7 billion. Now, their military power index rating is 0.7034. So of course, UAE is ranked a lot higher than many of its other neighboring countries. Those nations include Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar. Now, it's said that their forces are arguably some of the most capable among the Gulf Cooperation Council states. They've really gained a lot of valuable experience in Afghanistan, Libya, and Yemen, especially in recent years. And the country's special forces also impressed a lot of people, especially after their amphibious assault to capture the Yemeni port city of Aden, and that happened in July of 2015. Next up at number 6, we have the nation of Algeria. Now, they boast an active personnel of 130,000, and their defense budget sits at $13 billion. With some of the best equipment in North Africa, much of it being sourced from Russia and also from China, Algeria's military has a score of 0.4659. The country has had to battle domestic extremists for many years, as well as faces troublesome border areas with neighbors including Libya and Mali. Not to mention playing a very important role in supporting the Western Saharan independence movement, the Polisario Front. So that said, let's move on to the last 5 nations. Starting at number 5, we have Israel. Israel has a total active personnel of 170,000, and now they have a defense budget of $20 billion US. With numerous hostile neighbors to contend with, Israel has always felt the need to ensure that its armed forces are clearly superior to anything that they may have to face in battle. Israel Defense Forces are some of the best equipped and best trained, as well as most capable of any in the region, and this is according to the IISS. Also, they're continue to be supported heavily by the United States, and the country's military power index sits at 0.3111. Saudi Arabia comes next at number 4 with a total active personnel of 478,000, and now their defense budget is $67.6 billion. Yeah, that's a massive leap. They are a regional giant, at least in terms of its military budget and its size, which of course easily surpasses a lot of its other rival nations. Also, Saudi Arabia's military power index rating is 0.3034, so that's why it comes in at number 4. Now, the huge amount of money being spent in Saudi Arabia each year means that the country has some of the best equipped army forces in the entire Middle East region. Its involvement in the Yemen civil war over the past several years has given its forces valuable frontline experience, but its failure to defeat some of their opponents there also has raised questions about how effective their forces are when it comes to military action. But speaking of regional giants, we move on to number 3, Iran. Iran, they have a total active personnel of 523,000. Now, their defense budget is $19.6 billion. Iran has more active personnel than any other country in the Middle East region. Looking at their whole military together, their army, their navy, their air forces, as well as they have more men in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. Years of international sanctions have meant it has been unable to source many weapon systems from abroad, and this forces Iran to really improvise and develop a substantial homegrown defense industry. Its armed forces are also seen as particularly strong when it comes to asymmetric warfare, and the Iranian forces, particularly the elite Al-Quds unit of the IRGC, have played a very key role in fighting in both Syria as well as Iraq, and also Iran has provided support to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Iran's military power index rating sits at 0.2191, so that puts them at the number 3 spot at the head of many other nations in the Middle East. Now moving on now to number 2, Turkey. So some people still view Turkey as the most powerful nation in the Middle East, but they were recently bumped by another nation. We'll get to them in a second. But Turkey has an active personnel of 355,000 and their defense budget is $19 billion. Also, their military index power rating is 0.2098. And Turkey's armed forces have faced a lot of up and down throughout the years, which many of its officers purged from the services following a failed coup back in July of 2016. Now, since then, the country has become ever more heavily involved in the war in neighboring Syria, and concluding in the Afrin campaign launched back in January of 2018. Now, the country also has important overseas military ties with Qatar and Somalia, basing troops in both of those countries. Not only is it seen as the largest military force in the Middle East region, but it's ranked in 11th place globally, just ahead of Germany and Italy. And then now moving on to the number 1 most powerful nation currently in the Middle East, we have Egypt. Egypt has an active personnel count of 438,500 and their defense budget is $11.2 billion. With the former general now in charge of the country, Abdel el-Sisi, it is very unsurprising that Egypt's army is in a very powerful position in the domestic political arena. The defense forces of Egypt are currently in the midst of an equipment recapitalization program with new fighter aircraft, attack helicopters, surface-to-air missiles all being brought in. However, the country has struggled to deal with the challenge posed by insurgent terror groups in the northern Sinai Peninsula for the past few years. Now, their military power index rating is 0.1872, and Egypt is seen as now having the strongest military force in the Middle East and is ranked 9th strongest in the entire world. So that's where they are right now, guys. Sorry, it is no longer Turkey, it is now Egypt. All right, guys, so starting at number 10, we have the country of Brazil. Brazil's armed forces are the 2nd largest in the Americas after the United States and the largest in Latin America and the Southern Hemisphere by military power. They have taken steps to really modernize their military over the years. All military branches of the Brazilian Armed Forces are part of the Ministry of Defense, and the Brazilian Navy, which is the oldest of the Brazilian Armed Forces, includes the Brazilian Marine Corps and the Brazilian Naval Aviation. Their total active personnel sit at 360,000. The country we're going to look at next at number 9 is the country of Pakistan. The armed forces were formed in the year 1947 when Pakistan became independent from the British Empire. And since then, their military forces have gone through a lot. They have played a decisive role in the history of Pakistan, protecting its sense of national pride and unity and identity, and also dealing with their rival nation next door to them. Their active personnel sits at 640,000. Pakistan successfully conducted and demonstrated its publicly announced nuclear tests in the year 1998. The tests were codenamed Chagai-1 followed by Chagai-2, and they were performed in direct response to India's nuclear test Pokhran-2. Yeah, that's the neighbor that I'm talking about there. They've had a rivalry going on from way back. Pakistan became the 7th nation in the world to achieve the status of a nuclear power. That brings us to number 8, the United Kingdom. With a relatively small number of active military personnel of just 194,000, as well as a small number of aircraft and tanks, the United Kingdom still holds the 8th spot on this list. The British military does have an advantage when it comes to its geographical boundaries. And, just looking at a century ago, Great Britain was considered to be the world's strongest military. British soldiers were equipped with some of the latest weapons at the time, and today they still play a leading role in military power and are among the nations who have become a nuclear power state. The country next at number 7 is France. Although France doesn't hold an impressive number of ships, tanks, and planes, yet it still holds more advanced and efficient military equipment than some other countries. Rafale and Mirage jets, as well as Leclerc main battle tanks, Tiger helicopters, as well as being one of the only nations to be included in the exclusive club of being a nuclear power. Well, yeah, France's military has a whole lot of muscle behind it. A great portion of French military equipment is manufactured in France, so it's domestic, and it shows that France, as an independent nation, they can really produce their own weapons during wartime. They don't have to rely on any other nation. Their total active personnel sit at 205,000. We're going to be looking at South Korea next. Having more than 550,000 active military personnel, South Korea holds the 6th spot in terms of the most powerful military. South Korea maintains a large, well-equipped armed forces establishment consisting of Army, Navy, as well as Air Force branches, although it's still considerably smaller than that of the North Korean military. But the Army is by far the largest component when it comes to South Korea's military power. They also have a very sizable reserve force, which is another 500,000. Yeah, these guys got a whole lot of manpower. Halfway in at number 5, we look at Japan. The Japanese people feel a sense of pride as having one of the strongest militaries in the world. Japan is considered the 7th biggest in military spending in the world. They spend over $47 billion US on their military annually. Having the 6th biggest air fleet in the world, Japan stands among the strongest countries. It has more than 240,000 active military personnel, and Japan has not only one of the strongest militaries, but also has the advanced and latest arms technology at their disposal. Japan is growing in all ways when it comes to military power, as well as just on the global scale in general. Moving on now to number 4, this country is India. Having a great amount of aircraft, tanks, and navy, India holds the 4th spot in the strongest militaries. India does have the 2nd largest active military personnel in the world. India and Pakistan are great rivals, like I mentioned earlier, and this really serves as fuel to continually ramp up their military. Although India has not released any official statements about the size of its nuclear arsenal, there are some estimates that suggest that India has 160 nuclear weapons and has produced enough weapon-grade plutonium for up to 200 nuclear weapons. And next up, we're looking at China. This is the largest country in the world when it comes to population. It also has the 2nd largest military budget, spending $250 billion US annually. When it comes to active of personnel, China holds the #1 spot with 2 million active personnel. China has some of the most advanced and latest weapons that exist on the planet, and with the largest population in the world, as well as a strong economy, as well as becoming a nuclear power state, China boasts considerable power on the global scale, and it's definitely not a nation that you want to mess with. Of course, Russia and America have been great rivals when it comes to the military. Russia is considered to be the world's largest oil-producing country, and it has a large navy as well as great military statistics all around. When it comes to the number of military personnel, Russia holds the 5th spot, and their military budget is 3rd in the world. Matter of fact, their active military personnel is 850,000. Russia also has nuclear weapons in its possession, and their special operations forces, as well as a whole lot of propaganda, they're really taking over and invading Ukraine as we speak. And the fact that they're able to take such aggressive action and bold action, it proves that they can definitely defend themselves when facing any backlash. Now, to top this list, we have the United States of America. It's definitely not a big surprise. Most of you, I'm sure, would have guessed that they would be #1. But the United States is spending more than $770 billion annually on its military services. That is crazy. That's over 3 times more than China's overall military budget. The American military is behind both India and China when it comes to available manpower, with 1,390,000 active personnel. However, it does hold the #1 spot for being far superior when it comes to its air power, as well as its influence globally and its sizable nuclear arsenal. At number 10, we got the country of Morocco. So Morocco has the 5th largest armed forces in the entire region. It sits at 175,000 personnel, but it really faces a lot of challenges by one of the lowest defense budgets in the entire Middle East. The country does have military that's heavily engaged with the disputed Western Sahara territory, as well as it's patrolling its borders. Their motto is God, Homeland, King. They have 1,109 combat tanks, 2,720 armored fighting vehicles, 530 self-propelled artillery, 198 towed artillery, and their rocket projectors sit at a total of 72. Moving on to number 9, we have Syria. The Syrian army makes up approximately 80% of the combined services. It officially came into being in 1945 before Syria obtained full independence the following year. The Syrian army, as well as the rest of its armed forces, has been heavily involved in suppressing political movements within Syria. Their motto is Guardians of the Homeland. When it comes to the total combat tanks, they have 5,035. Their armored fighting vehicles count sits at 5,170. They got 500 self-propelled artillery. Their towed artillery sit at 2,210, and they have 700 rocket projectors in their possession. Malaysia is at number 8. The King of Malaysia is the supreme commander of the Malaysian Armed Forces. Now, the Malaysian Army currently has 17 corps and regiments. These are grouped into 3 main components. There's a combat element, the combat support element, and the support elements. The corps and regiments are currently organized into 5 divisions. The first military units in Malaysia can be traced back to March of 1861. Now, the modern Malaysian Army came about in January of 1933. Their motto is strong and loyal. Now, they have 74 combat tanks in their possession. They have a total of 1,460 armored fighting vehicles, 29 self-propelled artillery, 211 towed artillery, and 54 rocket projectors. Moving on now to number 7, we got the country of Algeria. Their army includes 2 armored and 3 mechanized divisions. And the Land Forces Command is charged with organizing and preparing the land forces so as to ensure the defense of the national land space in cooperation with other forces. Their land forces is comprised of a central command, military and operational sectors, big units and autonomous units, as well as training institutions. The motto of the Algerian nation is by the people and for the people. They have 2,475 combat tanks, 6,900 armored fighting vehicles in total. Their self-propelled artillery are totaled at 400, and they have 583 towed artillery. They also have 367 rocket projectors. projectors. Now number 6, Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabian army is the largest branch of the Saudi armed forces. Now I didn't find a motto specifically for the Saudi Arabian army, but the motto for the country is, "There is no God but Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of God." And they have been active since 1744 as an independent service arm, but they have been an official branch of the armed forces since 1902. Now back in the year 2000, Saudi Arabia's government spent billions of dollars to expand the Saudis' forces, including the Saudi army. Unfortunately, a lot of the modern equipment is still not fully used to its full potential. In any case, they have 1,062 combat tanks, they have 11,100 armored fighting vehicles, a whole lot of them, self-propelled artillery total at 705, towed artillery sits at 1,818, and they have 122 rocket projectors. Halfway in at number 5 we have Indonesia. So the Indonesian army is composed of a headquarters, 15 military region commands, a strategic reserve command, a special forces command, as well as various other units. Now there are today 5 types of infantry battalions in the Indonesian army, which are the Power Raider Infantry Battalion, Mechanized Raider Infantry Battalion, then they have the Raider Infantry Battalion, and then the Mechanized Infantry Battalion, and then finally the Infantry Battalion. A whole lot of infantry and battalions. Now their motto is "Unmatchable bird with noble goals." They have 315 combat tanks in their possession, and they also have 1,300 armored fighting vehicles, 141 self-propelled artillery, 356 towed artillery, and 36 rocket projectors. Number 4 is the country of Pakistan. The Pakistan Army is a voluntary force, and the primary objective and its constitutional mission is to ensure the national security as well as the national unity of Pakistan. It conducts humanitarian rescue operations at home as well as participates in peacekeeping missions mandated by the United Nations. The 2 main branches of the army are the combat arms and administrative services. Also consists of several branches that include the army officers, the junior commissioned or warrant officers, and other enlisted personnel. Their motto is "A follower of none but Allah, the fear of Allah, strive for Allah." Pakistan's army has 2,200 combat tanks, 3,665 armored fighting vehicles, 429 self-propelled artillery, 1,226 towed artillery, and a total of 150 rocket projectors. Now the nation coming in at number 3 is Iran. The Iranian army, or the Artesh, has its own joint staff which coordinates its 4 separate service branches, which are the ground forces, the air force, the Navy, and the newly established Air Defense Force. And the Iranian army fought 2 major invasions in the modern era. And the first time in 1941, it was the invasion by the Soviet and the British forces during World War II. And the second time was in 1980, and that was the Iraqi invasion, which lasted almost 8 years. Their motto is, "And our soldiers, they verily would be the victors." They have 1,632 combat tanks, 2,345 armored fighting vehicles, 570 self-propelled artillery, 2,128 towed artillery, and 1,900 rocket projectors. Now the nation coming in at number 2, Egypt. The Egyptian army is the largest service branch within the Egyptian armed forces. The Egyptian armed forces chief of staff's office is in Cairo, and he is the chief of staff of the army. It has 3 command and control headquarters as well as 9 command and control field headquarters, and they're directed from the chief of staff's office. Its most significant engagements happened in the 20th century, and these were the 5 wars that Egypt had with Israel, and they were in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1967 to 1970, as well as in 1973. Their motto is, "We painted the face of our nation on our hearts." They have in their possession 2,160 combat tanks, 5,735 armored fighting vehicles, 1,000 self-propelled artillery, 2,189 towed artillery, and 1,100 rocket projectors. And finally, the number 1 most powerful Muslim country when it comes to their army is Turkey. When it comes to Turkey's army, sources trace the army's foundation to Modu Chanyu of the Xiongnu Empire in 209 BC. But the modern history of the army began with its formation after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. As of late 2015, there's reports that suggested that Turkish army, along with the rest of their armed forces, have seen their personnel strength increase to similar levels of the 2000s. Now, the factors contributing to this are further stabilization of Syria and Iraq. Now, their motto is peace at home, peace in the world. They have 3,200 combat tanks, 9,500 armored fighting vehicles, 1,120 self-propelled artillery. Their total artillery counts sit at 1,272, and they have 350 rocket projectors. Now, the first nation I'm going to start off with is Turkey. When it comes to the Turkish army, sources trace the army's foundation back to the Modu Chanyu of the Xiongnu Empire in 209 BC. But of course, modern history of the army began after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Now, numbers as recent as 2015 report that the Turkish army, along with the rest of the entire Turkish military, have seen a huge growth in their personnel strength, and these numbers are comparable to their strength back in the 2000s. A big contributing factor for this type of growth is the destabilization of Syria as well as Iraq. Now, the Turkish army's motto is peace at home, peace in the world. Turkey's total combat tanks are 3,200, and they have a total of 9,500 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery sit at a total of 1,120, and they have 1,272 total artillery and 350 rocket projectors. The next nation's army I'm looking at is the nation of Pakistan. So the Pakistan army is a volunteer service, and their primary objective, as well as its constitutional mission, is to really just make sure that the national security and the national unity of Pakistan is really kept in check. It conducts a lot of humanitarian rescue operations at home, as well as participates in a lot of peacekeeping missions which are mandated by the United Nations overseas. Now, the two main branches of the army are the combat arms and the administrative services. All of them consist of several different branches that include army officers, junior commissioned officers, as well as other enlisted personnel. Their motto is a follower of none but Allah, the fear of Allah, strive for Allah. Pakistan's army has 2,200 combat tanks, 3,665 armored fighting vehicles, 429 self-propelled artillery. Their towed artillery count is 1,226, and they have 150 rocket projectors in their possession. The next nation to look at is Egypt. So the Egyptian army is the largest service branch within the Egyptian armed forces. The Egyptian armed forces chief of staff's office is in Cairo, and he's the chief of staff of the entire army. There's 3 command and control headquarters and 9 command and control field headquarters, and they're directed from the chief of staff's office. The most notable engagements of the Egyptian army, these all happened in the 20th century, and they were Egypt's 5 wars with Israel in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1967 to 1970, and also in 1973. The motto of the Egyptian army is, "We painted the face of our nation on our hearts." They have a total of 2,160 combat tanks. Their armored fighting vehicles sit at a total of 5,735. Their self-propelled artillery count is 1,000 even. Their towed artillery, however, is 2,189, and they have 1,100 rocket projectors. Next up, we have Indonesia. So the Indonesian army is composed of a headquarters as well as 15 military region commands and a strategic reserve command called Kostrad, which is a special forces command, as well as a special forces command Kopassus, and several other units. There are today 5 types of infantry battalions in the Indonesian army, and those are the Power Raider Infantry Battalion, the Mechanized Raider Infantry Battalion, the Raider Infantry Battalion, the Mechanized Infantry Battalion, and the Infantry Battalion. Their motto is unmatchable bird with noble goals. Their combat tanks sit at a total of 315. Their armored fighting vehicles total 1,300. Now their self-propelled artillery are at 141, their towed artillery 356, and they have 36 rocket projectors. The army of of the country of Iran is up next. Now, the Iranian army is also known as the Artesh. Now, Artesh has its own joint staff, which coordinates its 4 separate service branches, which are the ground forces, the air forces, the navy, and the air defense forces. Their headquarters are in Tehran, Iran, and the Iranian army has fought 2 major invasions in modern era. The first one was back in 1941, and this invasion was by the Soviet and the British forces during the time of World War II. The second was in 1980, and that was the Iraqi invasion, which lasted almost 8 years. Their motto is, "And our soldiers, they verily would be the victors." Getting down to the specifics, when we look at their combat tanks, they have 1,634, they have 2,345 armored fighting vehicles, 570 self-propelled artillery, 2,128 towed artillery, and 1,900 rocket projectors. Yeah, they're packing a lot when it comes to the rock. Okay, moving on to the next country is Saudi Arabia. So the Saudi Arabian army is the largest branch of the Saudi Arabian armed forces. Now, I didn't really find a motto for the Saudi Arabian army, but I did find a motto for Saudi Arabia as a country, and it is, "There is no God but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God." The Saudi army has been active since 1745, and that was when it was an independent service arm. But of course, it's now been an official branch of the armed forces since 1902. And in the year 2000, the Saudi Arabian government, they spent billions of dollars to expand Saudi's forces, including their army, of course. But unfortunately, there's a lot of modern equipment that they had to learn and really introduce into their army. And a lot of the equipment is still not properly understood or even used to this day. Nevertheless, the Saudis have a very powerful army. They have 1,062 combat tanks, 11,100 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery totals 705. Their towed artillery is at 1,818, and their rocket projectors sit at 122. The next country in this list is Algeria. So the Algerian army includes 2 armored and 3 mechanized divisions. Land Forces Command is really responsible for organizing and preparing the land forces so as to ensure the defense of the national land space in cooperation with the other forces in Algeria. Now, the organization of Algeria's land forces is made up of a central command, military and operational sectors, big units, and autonomous units, as well as you'll find training institutions. Now, a lot of their equipment was provided by Russia and various other countries. And the motto for Algeria as a nation is, "By the people and for the people." Their combat tanks sit at a total of 2,475. They have 6,900 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery total at 400. Their towed artillery is at 583, and they have 367 rocket projectors. And then Malaysia is our next nation. So the King of Malaysia is the supreme commander of the Malaysian Armed Forces, and the Malaysian Army currently has 17 corps or regiments. Now, these are grouped into 3 main components: the combat element, then there is the combat support element, and then the support element. So the corps and regiments are currently organized into 5 divisions. The first military units in Malaysia can be traced all the way back to March 1861. And then fast forward a bunch of years, the modern Malaysian army came into existence in January 1933. And their motto is "Strong and Loyal." The Malaysian army has 74 combat tanks in their possession. They have a total of 1,460 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery sit at 29, and their towed artillery total 211, and they have 54 rocket projectors in their possession. So now, coming down to the end of this list, we have Syria. The Syrian army makes up approximately 80% of the combined services. It officially came into existence in 1945 before Syria obtained full independence the following year. And what we know about the Syrian armed forces is that they have really been involved in suppressing a lot of the political movements within Syria. Their motto is "Guardians of the Homeland." They have 5,035 combat tanks, 5,170 armored fighting vehicles, 500 self-propelled artillery. Their towed artillery total at 2,210, and they have 700 rocket projectors.